So we're talking about discipleship. We started out talking about definition. Disciple is someone who follows Jesus, who's being changed by Jesus, and joins him in his mission. Being, I will make you fishers of men. Come follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. We talked some last week about identity, and that even if there wasn't a command to go and make disciples, we would still do that because of just who we are made to be. We're made to be children of God, and children reflect the image of God. We are image bearers, and so it exudes from who we've been made. And today, I want to talk a little bit now about this idea of discipleship that begins in our homes, but it's also a discipleship method that Jesus also used with his disciples. And it's this idea of impress along the way. Impress along the way. And so we're going to go to Deuteronomy 6. Now, when I say impress your kids, do I mean, do magic tricks, that kind of thing? Do I mean tell dad jokes? Do I mean go try to play ultimate frisbee with the young guys? And that was not impressive when I did that yesterday. That was the least from impressive, yes. Do you tell your young people around you how you use Snapchat and you can things on TikTok? Will that impress them? Probably not if you're over 38. Should you wear skinny jeans? Would that be impressive? Probably. No, I'm talking about a different kind of impression. Impress upon. And it's, again, this method that Jesus used, but I think he learned it from Moses a long time ago. In fact, Jesus, he quoted Deuteronomy quite a bit. When he was in the desert being tempted by Satan, all he quoted was Deuteronomy. And so we're going to go back to Deuteronomy 6, verses 1 through 12. And I just want to read this right now. You can turn there if you like, or you can just listen. Starts out this way. These are the commands, decrees, and regulations that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you. You must obey them in the land you're about to enter and occupy. And you and your children and grandchildren, what's that again? And you and your children and your grandchildren must fear the Lord your God as long as you live. If you obey all his decrees and commands, you will enjoy a long life. Listen closely, Israel, and be careful to obey, then all will go well with you. And you will have many children in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord your God of your ancestors promised you. Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home, and when you are on the road, and when you are going to bed, and when you are getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Verse 10, the Lord your God will soon bring you into the land he swore to give you when he made a vow to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is a land with large, prosperous cities that you did not build. The houses will be richly stocked with goods you did not produce. You will draw water from cisterns you did not dig, and you will eat from vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. When you have eaten your fill in this land, be careful not to forget the Lord, who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. You must fear the Lord your God and serve him. So, here is God's plan of discipleship long time ago. It's for the spiritual formation of our hearts. It's parents to children. In fact, he even mentions grandparents or grandchildren. So it's you, your children, your grandchildren. This was the initial idea of how it was to be passed along. But we want to encourage and help parents in this effort to disciple. your own kids, but we also want to encourage aunts and uncles. Sorry, I said aunts. I know some people, take offense at that. All right. Brothers and sisters, we want people who care about the next generation to help in this process. But, this is also something Jesus adopted as his method of discipling those who are not his biological children. So we're all going to take a look at this in Deuteronomy 6, and we're going to observe how Jesus also modeled this impressing upon method in the Gospels, okay? So first, impress. Some translate it to whet or sharpen, like a whetting stone. So you're sharpening on this whetting stone. That might be an idea that you think of when it's something's being impressed upon. Others translate it more with the context of writing of an earlier time, like impressions upon the clay, like Sherry was showing with the Play-Doh. When impressions are made upon something soft and then it dries, that clay or Play-Doh, the impressions are dried and they're made permanent. It's left there. It's a lasting imprint. Here from Deuteronomy 6, I just want to kind of flash through this. And there's 4 good basic ground rules or starting points here in Deuteronomy 6, okay? And then we'll jump to Jesus and looking how he modeled these things with his disciples. So the Israelites, they already had stories as means to pass on the accounts of God and his interactions with them. And now Moses offers a number of ways to pass on commands that reveal God's character. All right. So number 1, to pass on or to impress, you will need to know what you're talking about. All right. Think about Mr. Miyagi and Karate Kid. All right. Wax on, wax off. What if Daniel-san said, Mr. Miyagi, what was the purpose of wax on, wax off? I don't know. You just do it. There's moments where maybe think about some of you, how many of you played Little League sports when you were a kid? Little League sports? Or you took some art lessons or music lessons or something like that. What if you had a coach or a teacher who didn't really know? I had a soccer coach who didn't know anything about soccer. That happens. And so I didn't really learn anything from that soccer coach. But I did have one good soccer coach who actually played semi-professional MISL indoor soccer league, and I learned a lot from that soccer coach. So you think about that, somebody who knew their stuff was able to impart more to me than someone who didn't know their stuff. It's kind of like the pre-flight announcement when you get on the airplane, and in event of emergency, oxygen mask will drop from the compartment above. Please put this on first before you put it on your child, and then assist your child. If you're not breathing, it's a little hard to help your child breathe in that instance. Same way spiritually, it's a little hard to spiritually feed your child if you're not feeding yourself first. So get on that oxygen of taking in the things of God, his word, his stories, prayer. You need that. So Jesus said, can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. We become like our teachers. It's kind of scary. So we need to think about that. Your kids are going to become like you. Even the ones who say, I'm never going to be like my dad. I'm never going to be like my mom. What do you know? Lo and behold, even though they resist it, they still end up like you, right? Some of you can testify to that already in your life. Yeah. So know the Word of God for yourself first before trying to pass it on. Now, there are exceptions to this. Sometimes you're learning and you just immediately turn around and give it to the one behind you. And that's okay. I've been doing that recently as I've in a group that's discipling me, I'm turning around and just passing it on to the guys I'm meeting with. So there are moments when it's like that, but it's great if you have some personal knowledge and experience. And we'll talk more about this in a little bit. But so Moses, if you go before chapter 6 into chapter 4, Moses talks about this, know about what you're talking about, have some firsthand experience. So Moses instructed them, don't add anything to the words of the law, Deuteronomy 4:2. Speak from experience. Put the commands into practice. Deuteronomy 4:5 and 6. Don't forget the things God has said or done in the past. Deuteronomy 4:9. Remembering is so important. You'll see remember all through Deuteronomy. And then don't forget the Lord or substitute anyone or anything for him. Deuteronomy 4. Idolatry is so easy to slip into in our culture, and we don't even realize it. Be a disciple before making disciples. I'm going to be a disciple first. All right, second ground rule, basic starting point in this whole thing of impress along the way. Cultivate your own faith. Cultivate your own faith. Right here in chapter 6, Moses says, you've got to develop personal contact with God. You need to personally fear the Lord all your days. Deuteronomy 6:2. Again, that fear is a fear, awe, not a worry or anxiousness. There might be some like tremble in your boots kind of stuff every now and then, but it is a awe fear of wow. We're so awesome, I could melt into the ground right now. So there is how do you cultivate this fear of the Lord, this awe, respect, and honor of God? How do you do that? You need to, it's Deuteronomy 6:2, and then you need to love the Lord with all your being, with your heart, soul, and strength. That's all, not just parts, not 1/4. I'm going to love God with 1/4 of my heart. I'm going to love God with 3/4 of my soul, and I'll love God with half of my strength. All. And so we got to develop and cultivate our love for God. So cultivating this awe, respect, this fear of the Lord, cultivating love for him personally. And then we need to establish habits and strategies for recalling and rehearsing the story of God's dealings in our own life, in the life of your ancestors. One of the silly ways I did this was I had this, I do a sheet of answered prayers. I do prayers and then answers. And I would have one side, I write down prayer requests that were kind of in general for our family, because this was going to go up on the refrigerator. And then I would write the date when it was answered. And so it was on the refrigerator, a certain period, time of life. And now it's just tucked in my Bible cover. But it was a moment of saying, we're going to remember God is hearing us. God is answering our prayers. Look, we can see in the past what he has done. And it was a marker right there on the refrigerator door, everybody opened every day. So establish habits and strategies for recalling, rehearsing God's story of his life in your life and your ancestors. My grandfather played such a huge role in my life by just telling me stories of the people that were before him. I was a kid, again, in a split home, and I was wrestling with who I was and my identity. And when he told me those stories, it was like, oh yeah, okay, that's a McCready. That's what we do. And it kind of just settled me. It grounded me to hear those stories. And some of those stories were, my grandfather told silly stories. So sometimes it was, yeah, McCready's are kind of goofy. And then there was like, okay, yeah, we also are people of faith, and we're gonna hang on and trust the Lord. So, and then we need to cultivate living a life of gratitude, remembering that all you have and where you live are gifts from a good God, not the results of your own efforts. All right? Deuteronomy 6, 7, and 9. All right, so third ground rule for this impress along the way and beginning this, teach by example. Teach by example. Moses urged the Israelites to practice the commands of God so that their children could see it in action, not just hear it recited. There's an African proverb that goes like this. It says, I cannot hear what you say for the thunder of what you are. I cannot hear what you say for the thunder of what you are. We don't want that kind of contrast in the words that we say and then in the way we live. We want there to be an alignment with what we say and what we live. So we want to practice the commands of God. And then to do that, though, we have got to get a perspective. Live with the perspective that God owns everything. God, that's Deuteronomy 10:14. God shows no partiality. So we shouldn't practice favoritism, whether that be, what's listed in Deuteronomy. Don't practice favoritism with orphans or widows or strangers or immigrants or those who are not those people. Because we need to remember, for you were once a stranger. You were once an orphan. Once you did not belong to God. Deuteronomy 10:17-18. So you've seen God do things or help you in life in ways that your kids haven't seen yet. Recall these things. Talk about them. Take them to places where his deeds of the past are talked about and remembered. Whereas sometimes that's church. We sing songs. We sing songs about what God did in the past. We sing from Scripture, from the Psalms that's recounting what God did and how he answered his people in prayer. So keep a singular focus on the Lord. Watch out for those things that will divide your loyalty to him. And now here's the big thing under teach by example. And here's where we're kind of moving into where we get ready to catapult to Jesus and how he did this. You talk about God and the truth of his word along life's day-to-day activities. Look at the phrases in Deuteronomy 6. When you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. You could add yours. When you're doing a building project. Or maybe some of you are like me, and sometimes that's when the cuss words come out and you hit your thumb with the hammer. So maybe not that moment. But there's moments, the ordinary moments of life along the way. These are all the in-between times. It's not classroom times. It's along the way time. And look, I know some about the hitting your thumb with the hammer. I know about the trying to get your 4 kids in the car and to get them to go somewhere, and it's just rah, 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 and there's words and there's frustration, and it's you say something you don't mean. I know that there's heated moments. It's kind of like the bus driver who it was a hot summer day, and a bunch of people were getting on the bus, and the air conditioner broke down. And one of the ladies getting on the bus was just having a day. And she was so frustrated about something that she just let out a long string of cuss words. And the bus driver looked up and looked in his mirror, and he could see all the people around this lady just kind of looking away and looking embarrassed and not sure. It was just creating an awkward moment. And when they arrived at their destination and this lady was walking off all in a huff to get off the bus, he said, "Excuse me, miss, you left something behind." She snapped at him and said, "What?" He said, "A bad impression." And sometimes we do that in heated moments. We leave a bad impression. But do you know you can even turn around those heated moments and those bad impressions and redeem them? By doing things like, kids, Dad said something stupid, and I shouldn't have said that. I really didn't. I didn't want you to hear that, and that's not what I really love you. Forgive me. There's moments you can turn around those moments, even in along the way times. So, turn a moment, a heated moment, just turn to humility and desire what God desires, and even when you miss the mark. All right, so there's one last thing that Moses taught in Deuteronomy 6, and that was think and be a little more creative. He said, tie these commands as symbols upon your hands and your heads. You know, we even do that today. I see people wear jewelry there's crosses. Sometimes people wear, I see mothers wear rings that have certain birthstones. Those are symbols of your kids. So I know people wear bracelets sometimes and might have a verse inscribed on it. So we do those kind of things. And that's a creative way, again, to recall these words of God, promises and commands. And Moses says, do this. He says, write them on your door frames of your houses and on your gates. You know, we do welcome mats, don't we, in front of our house? We do placards on the wall. I know there was a phase in interior decorating where people would write words on their walls or have they're painted in nice graphic stencil stuff. And, you know, you can still do that. You don't have to say it's a fad. You can say, no, this is a Moses thing. This was done before this fad came around, okay? You can do that. You know, people at their ranches, you know, they have, you know, Double J Ranch over the gate post going in, you know. I don't know. You could do your Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 or something. I don't know. You can do whatever. In my family, it's a really strange thing with digital clocks. Whenever it says 6:33, that's the thing. Everybody, if you look at a clock and it says 6:33, seek first Lord and his righteousness and all these things, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And that's the verse that's recalled whenever we see it. And it's a reminder to our family that's what we're about. We're not seeking after all the things that maybe other people seek, that we're seeking these things. So there's symbols. There's ways we can be creative. You know, Moses wrote a song to declare God's ways to Israel, and then he taught it to them and told them to pass it on to their children. You know, not everybody has songwriters in their family, but maybe I should commission you. Do a song for our family so we can pass it on to the generations after. You know, play the songs for your children. There's songs that are written by other people we can adopt and they become your family's song. That's all right. You can do that. Play the songs for your children. Teach your children the songs of God. You know, there were yearly celebrations that Moses and the Israelites were beginning to rehearse. And it was these celebrations were to rehearse the stories in the past of how God had interacted with them. And there's importance to those things that we celebrate, like Christmas or Easter or even Thanksgiving. You got traditions that you do. Create those things. You know, some of you who are starting new families, you're coming from a family that did these certain things, but maybe you're going to make it your own. You're going to start a tradition that's going to help pass on something important that God has impressed on you. And now you're going to impress it on to those that God has entrusted you to. So tell the stories to your children. You've got to do it. You've got to do it. You are the most important person in their lives. Preacher man up here, he can have a little bit of impact, but I'm not the most important person in your kid's life. You are. So if it comes from you, it has a greater impact, much greater impact. So this is the method of impressing upon your children, and it's not just recorded here in Deuteronomy 6, it's also recorded in Deuteronomy 11, 18 through 21, basically saying the same thing. Impress these things along the way, and they had the celebrations and the markers and the year. Moses told them to keep them going, and then before Moses departs, he gives them a song. And then we jump all the way to the New Testament, and Jesus practices this same method of impressing upon with his disciples. Mark 3, 13 through 14, Jesus went up on the mountainside, and he called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, designating them apostles, that they might be with him, and that he might send them out. So they might be with him. So what happened with Jesus when he was with them? Well, one of the things that happened with Jesus was they traveled. They traveled together. Sometimes walking on the road, Jesus would be walking along with them, and Jesus wasn't always talking. Sometimes Jesus was listening to his disciples as they walked along the road. After one walk along the way and arriving at the house in Capernaum, Jesus pulled them aside and asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" Oops. They didn't want to tell him because they had been arguing about who was the greatest. So sitting down, and again, sitting down in the Hebrew culture means you're teaching. So it's opposite of what we do. We stand up and someone speaks. In old times, you sat down to teach. And so he sat down, meaning he was going to tell them something important, and said to them, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all." And then he brings in an example right before them. I mean, great teacher, object lesson right here, brings in a little child and says, had him stand among them and said, if you welcome this child, you welcome me. So that's Mark 9, 33, 37. So another traveling moment. Along the way, Jesus is going to impress upon his disciples. Another traveling moment was not on the road, but it was on the water. Jesus used a storm to show his disciples a little more of who he was and the opposition of fear to faith. The storm had them scared, and Jesus was asleep in the stern of the boat. And they woke him up, and Jesus speaks to the storm, and it's calmed. And he turns around to him and says, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And Jesus showed that he held a power that can calm our fears. Sometimes Jesus impressed upon his disciples at mealtime. Once before a mealtime, when work was running late and the disciples were hungry, Jesus asked a question to one specific disciple, to Philip. And he turns to Philip and he says, "Philip, where should we buy bread to feed all these people?" Philip is like, "What? What are you thinking? How? This many months' wages to feed these people." And it says in John 6, verses 5 and 6, he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. So it's an along the way moment, but it's very intentional. There's some intention. Jesus knows what he's doing, and not everything is an accident. So Jesus told stories at mealtime. Like with Simon the Pharisee. But sometimes at a meal, he would demonstrate what he wanted his disciples to know and learn. Like the meal with Zacchaeus. Jesus made a toast, a proclamation that Zacchaeus was a true son of Abraham and that salvation had come to this house. What did Jesus do in that moment? Jesus demonstrated removing shame from someone and giving them honor instead. And that was the big way the gospel came to people in the East. It was a culture of honor and shame. And so Jesus was always removing shame and then placing honor on someone and creating an opening for the gospel. At another mealtime, Jesus demonstrated what he wanted his disciples to remember by grabbing a towel and some water. And he went around washing their feet. And at the end of it, he said, "If your teacher has done this, then you should too." A lot more lasting impression than a guy standing up here talking. Probably not going to remember a lot of this by next Sunday. But I'm telling you, along the way, you can make deep and lasting impressions. Not lecture moments, not classroom moments, but along the way moments. Jesus used questions along the way. When they were touring around and came to Caesarea Philippi, where there's lots of shrines and idols carved into the cliffside there, Jesus asked his disciples, amongst all these other gods, he says, "Who do the people say I am?" And then his disciples were like, "Well, people say this, and people say that, and people say that." That's a real great opening question. It's a big open-end question. And then Jesus hones in with the second question. He says, "Who do you say I am?" And then he got a little more specific. It's not those people out there, but who do I say you are? Wow. Jesus was a master at asking questions. Whose image is on this coin? Is it lawful to heal or to harm on the Sabbath? Where are your accusers? He asked questions that left us thinking and left an impression. Jesus even used his own physical need to cause others to start asking questions. Like to the Samaritan woman at the well, he asked, "Will you give me a drink of water?" Knowing that him, as a Jewish man, asking it to a Samaritan, it was just totally breaking all the rules. And it created so many questions for this woman. Such a string of questions that led to her receiving the gospel and a whole village receiving the gospel. Sometimes Jesus would have conversations with individuals with his disciples present, and then he would take them aside and explain. You ever thought about that? The moments maybe you might have someone over to your house and your kids are in the room and you're having a conversation, that maybe some of the things you talk about, that you might take them aside afterwards and say, "Hey, you may have overheard us saying this." Or sometimes kids, they're really observant, and then they'll ask you afterwards, "I heard you say this. What did you mean by that?" And you have a moment, an aside moment to explain. Like the conversation Jesus had with the rich young ruler, his disciples were watching and listening, and afterwards Jesus said to his disciples, how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom. And then their question back to him was like, well, how can anyone be saved then? And then it led to more questions, a conversation about what we might leave behind for the sake of Jesus and what we might gain when we follow Jesus. Jesus impressed his disciples along the way, even in the early morning and late at night, when you get up and when you lie down. After an exciting and long evening at Capernaum at Peter's house, he healed his mother, Peter's mother-in-law, of a fever, and then the whole town started bringing the sick to him. And so he was healing people late into the night. But it so happened that the disciples wake up in the morning and they can't find Jesus. Where's Jesus? Man, I thought he'd be wiped out. I thought he'd still be sleeping after all that work. And they're wondering, and they go looking for him. And we read in Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went off to a solitary place where he prayed. When they found him, they expected that he was going to be like, yeah, let's go back and capitalize on this ministry that we had last night. I mean, wasn't it fruitful? Man, we got to do more here. We can build on this, and the testimony will go far and wide. And Jesus, after praying, the disciples realized he's got a whole new direction. Jesus is saying, no, we need to leave here. I was called to go and preach. And so let's go to the other villages and do that. What? I thought we were doing stuff in Capernaum. Okay, now we're going. All right. And that was because you were praying and talking to the Father and got some direction and reminders. What an impression that left on his disciples. Jesus often went up on a mountain to pray in the evenings. And one special evening, he invited 3 of the disciples to join him so that they could know that prayer could help them not to fall in temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Oh, and the events that followed, they realized the truth of that statement. Oh. So I'm just scratching the surface here, but it's everywhere in the gospel accounts. Jesus impressing on his disciples along the way. When they rose, when they lied down, when they ate, when they traveled, when they saw interesting things, when they interacted with people. Yes, Jesus did have certain moments that he lectured. He spoke to a crowd. He spoke in synagogues. But we actually only have one fully recorded sermon in the Gospels. Only one fully recorded sermon in the Gospels. Others are bits, parts where maybe he taught in a synagogue or as he was teaching along the way. In fact, when you look at Jesus' command to his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations, it is about along the way. You know, we read our translations in English usually say, therefore, go and make disciples, Matthew 28, 19 through 20. But literally it says, as you are going, make disciples. As you are going, make disciples. And I can't help but think, with Jesus and his method, it is this Deuteronomy along the way. When you wake, when you lie down, when you eat at the table, when you sit at home, as you go along the way. This is the method of Jesus in making disciples and passing on what is important to the generation after us. And I know there's all kinds of methods for communicating and teaching, but this is the method Jesus used that transformed lives, not just merely transferred information. It transformed lives. Isaac, you can come on up. I'm going to wrap this up here. How well did Jesus' method work? Well, look at the end of his time with his disciples in his prayer to the Father in John 17. If you look there, and as I read the words, Jesus' words about completing his work of impressing, think about your children. Think about the young people around you in your life. Think about the generation after you and tell me, wouldn't you hope to be able to pray these words about your children, your niece, your nephew, your grandchildren, your younger brother, your younger sister? Think about this. Could you pray this prayer to God? I have revealed you to those whom you gave me out of the world. Your children were given to you. Your niece, your nephew was given to you. Your sister, your brother was given to you. Jesus goes on, they were yours. You gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. Now they know that everything you have given me comes from you. I gave them the words you gave me, and they accepted them. Oh, isn't that the prayer that we hope for our children? They knew with certainty that I came from you. Don't we hope that our children and the next generation would know that Jesus, to know with certainty that he's from the Father, and they believe that you sent me. These are the words Jesus prayed at the end. He completed that work of impressing. And the way he did it, as he went along, when you lie down, when at home, when on the road, when you're getting up. It's not accidental. It's intentional. So learn and know the stories. Tell the stories. Live your life according to these stories. And think about the ways you can be creative in passing these on along the way. Father, you've given us a message that makes us messengers. Help us to live that out. Help us to be disciples first. Help us to cultivate our own faith, our love for you, our awe and respect of you. Help us to cultivate that so that in those along the moments, the words we say align with our actions, the way we live. And our Lord, that you'll give those stories and words the weight that they need to be able to impress upon a heart that's near us. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.